Okay, this is an ancient depiction of Cernunnos. He's a pagan god, you know. But what this is a man that's in tune with nature. You'd like to think of him as being a Celtic type person or something from back in the day. Druidic knowledge and so on. You can see around his neck he has a torque with the two beads on the end. And in his right hand you see the same thing, and he's waiting for someone to take that. When I was younger, there was an artifact just like that people would put around their wrist. It had magnets on the end of it, and it was supposed to help you out magnetically through your veins and all that stuff, and line up the iron in your blood and all kinds of things. They even made up ones that would work for your car, even though gasoline doesn't really contain any metals that would work, and if that worked, they would suck to the magnet and no longer be in solution. So how would that work? Nevertheless, there's a lot of esoteric knowledge that's in the torque that's right there, and if one looked at ancient depictions from Sumeria or in Egypt, you would actually see the same type of thing. In Sumeria you see Inanna holding the same rope type torque thing that's coiled around in her hand in much the same way, and a symbology that goes with the master of the beast and so on. And in fact, the cartouche of the ancient Egyptians is this same loop of rope extended out, so you could end up having his new name inside of that, and his holy name or his godly name when the Egyptians became a god inside of a cartouche. And if we look closer at this, in his other hand he has a snake, and the symbology here is not lost on everybody, but we all know about the ancient tale of Gilgamesh and how the snake got away and was not able to attain immortality, whereas in this situation he lets you know that he caught the snake. There's a lion in the top right hand corner. There's a wolf right over in the middle side of it right here. Some people have tried to call that a dog, but these are wild creatures. In your far left you'll see a depiction of a bull. Some people have said that's an antelope type of thing because of its beaked type nose, but they just didn't draw a cube nose on it real well. The rest of its stature shows that it's probably a bull. What's directly to the left of this man in the picture is a stag, but this is not to symbolize just a deer. Just like the wolf is not just a wolf, the snake is not just a snake, the lion is not just a lion, and that man is not just a man. For that deer is like the king of the forest. An idea that's easy to relate to, that people would probably understand, is Bambi's father. This is the king of the forest. And he's in tune, and in fact it's showing you that they have this correlation because he can call upon him and come to you, just like he could call upon a wolf and it would come to him. Deers shed their antlers and regrow them each year too. There's a symbology in that, but his antlers stay full. There's also an ivy type, or most people would call that oak leaves, trapped inside of his antlers and in the king of the forest. Reminds me much of the deer or stag that I have in the D&D video game that I showed you not too long ago, where he's got it twined around him. There's a autumn version, and I even have a new version I'll have to show you in a new video as soon as there's enough stuff to correlate to make that video with the new area that we're in. For it has to deal with these people here and the move, and in fact they're moving to New Sherendar from Old Sherendar. Yeah, it's a pretty big move. If we look closer at this, there's other leaves like here at the bottom and what looks like flowers to the right, and some people have actually said, no, that's actually opium poppies. Other people have argued flowers, and so the idea that this right here or this or these would not be oak leaves, but actually is a poppy or flowers. So we're in this Sylvan area in this ancient glade, and if you'll look at his stature and his posture, he does have that master of beast things going on, but also he is embracing the idea of Buddha. His eyes are closed, he's in serenity. His legs are crossed in such a way, and if we look close enough, he's actually wearing shoes. Again, we refer to the Celts on this type of thing, but if you'll look, he's a Celt without a kilt. He's not wearing a kilt. He's actually wearing a full sleeve shirt, a belt, and then what looks like shorts for pants. They're striped. So sometimes just in one of these little artifacts that you find, there's a lot of knowledge that's in it. Some kind of magic too. You'll see this impression on the side of cauldrons and things like that, and that cauldron was used to make magic from things of the forest. In our modern day, we don't use these things along with it and all of this paganist ritual that goes along with it really anymore, but we still make medicines. Much out of the same things people did before for the same reasons. There's a little more to this, but let's just keep going and get on into this, because what we're really not discussing necessarily Coronis, but we're discussing the true meaning of paganism. The word paganism has come to refer to various pre-Christian religions belonging to a number of ancient cultures, those from Greece, or Rome, Egypt, Scandinavia, and so on. It has come also to represent in some circles the modern ideology of Wicca, or witchcraft, and the followers of revived versions of old practices. Did a video last year about this, how people have revived a lot of these ancient rites. The truth about paganism, however, is that it's a historically inaccurate phrase in the context of these aforementioned faiths. Although it is now an accepted term for these religions, it is important to examine where the word truly came from and what it initially meant, allowing for a better, all-inclusive understanding of the world's religious pasts. The term paganism was derived or revived during the Renaissance, when the writers were trying to differentiate the old traditions from their contemporary Christian faith. This is locking up on me, isn't it? Yeah. It's going to reload. Bear with me. For we're starting to get into some things that are pretty important. Sorry. This term, paganism, was revived during the Renaissance era, when the writers were trying to differentiate the old traditions from their new contemporary Christian faith. The term itself stems from the Latin paganus, translated loosely along the lines of country dweller or rustic, or actually agriculturalist. Thus, it was initially a word describing a person of locality rather than a religion exactly. However, because of its usage in ancient text and in modern days towards every religion that ever came before in a shunning manner, medieval authors mistakenly believed it referred to a religious sect and thereby gave it to the corresponding connotation. In actuality, there's a different word used to describe the pagans as they are called today, and that word too stemmed first and foremost from the location of the religious supporters. So pagan actually means agriculturists, people who weren't in the big cities. People are outliers, but they weren't part of the big city. It was an omission of people, kind of like calling someone a hick in some ways, that they weren't hip because they weren't in New York, if you know that kind of feeling and people try to expose. Real important, though, these people that are outliers are quite often farmers. Like I say, it deals with agriculturists, and therefore it's real important that everything goes on well. In fact, in the ancient beliefs, if y'all didn't do everything right, then it wouldn't rain real good, and the cause of the drought wasn't because of that farmer. It was because of your misdeeds, wasn't it? So there are other words that seemingly go along with this, like Ethiopians. For if we look at Herodotus' old map, we're really not talking about some admixed people that live in a modern day in a country that used to be called Abyssinia until recently. We're actually talking about people that live at the end of river valleys everywhere, and their corresponding agriculturalists. The corresponding modern term that you would use, especially here in America, would be redneck. For they do get quite tanned, but they're wearing shirts and so on. But you can imagine whenever they were wearing much less fabric, that they would have become tanned all over their bodies pretty much, and not just their face, which is what they tell you Ethiopian means, is sunburned or tanned face, right? But there's an older term before this pagan idea, and it tried to target the thing that everybody was enamored on, and in a way, it tried to shun itself from the connections. According to scholar Pete Brown of Princeton University, Hellene was initially utilized in place of paganism. Hellene was a reference to Hellas, the native ancient Greek name for what is now called Greece. Brown explains that when Christianity started making appearances in the Eastern communities, Hellene was also used to differentiate the non-Christians from the Christians. So it would be a way of saying that, oh, you still believe in all the old stuff, which of course a lot of it is Greek. And I've explained before quite a few times that the Greek gods weren't necessarily of gods of just one little mountain that were there, but of corresponding gods all around. In fact, there were quite a few connections made in ancient times, as this reloads, and by the Greeks themselves into other gods. Good example of this is when we talked about the Ethiopians, because they said plainly that whenever they, I believe Diodorus Siculus and others, said that the Ethiopians didn't have a full pantheon as rich as them. This is again those farmer type people. But what they did have a connection to was they had the sky god that everyone else had, this Zeus type idea, the lightning bolt carrier and the sky god, and a god of rebirth. Yeah. They had like an Osiris thing, yeah, and then they had their sun god or sky god situation, which if we look at all the other religions, they all have this. In fact, I made a video that connects to the idea of storm gods and where that came from and how that was a ruler of everything, because this came from Proto-Indo-Europeans and their original sky god, who was the god of the day, or a sun god too. And that's where we get the word day from today when we speak of it in every word of day. Deus, and being a father, it's Pitar, where we get Peter from in the Bible, but Pitar means father. So Deus Pitar means day father. Yeah, but during the night, a representation that was used for him was the star that wanders around, we know as Jupiter. That's where Deus Pater comes from. Let's continue. Those from this Hellas tended to remain faithful to these old religions, but the strife between Judaism and Christianity beginning, the Jewish faction needed to ensure that they were not incorrectly associated with them. They were not from Greece. Hellene became the perfect title. So they would just we wouldn't call them Grecians or anything like that. Here we're seeing one of those incredibly huge temples here. This was to Dios Pater, Zeus, or Jupiter, for it really ends up being the same thing. Made a lot of connections over the last few years here on the side on that connection. Let's just continue. In the Latin West, it was more common for the various religions to refer to themselves by their ethnic origins rather than by the gods they necessarily worshipped. They simply referred to themselves in their own language as Romans or Greeks or Egyptians or Kemet, etc., simultaneously insinuating their religious factions as well. This form of labeling was largely due to the fact that political and religious aspects of life were a unified entity. Well, people knew what pantheons and what was going on with the different people, although it was really variations on a theme once you get down to it and break it down. And that's why they were able to say so many connections, like I said before, where they said, well, they believe in a sky day father and they believe in a god of rebirth. Again, let me make a connection to you. Since we've come full circle now, and that Bible makes all the connections of the ancients and puts it together in a 10-tribe situation and all of those thoughts, are we not in the Bible worshiping an Old Testament sky father? Are we not worshiping a God of resurrection in Jesus? Oh, snap. Thus, the tradition of ethnic tilting appears to have been continued by the early Christians. As far as ancient sources can tell, it wasn't until the late Roman Empire that the term pagan actually began to be used instead. It was an easy way to lump all the non-Christians together in a conversation, decrees and so on. It rose to popularity as a matter of convenience rather than that of accuracy or respect. Notice that these people we're talking about, Romans, had just made the incredible flip-flop themselves. Right. Let's continue. It's important to note that paganism is not intended to differentiate from the polytheistic religions from monotheistic. The number of gods does not apply to the term because many so-called pagans would have not considered it important to differentiate themselves based on necessarily the number of gods that they worshipped. Again, I revert to the idea where they tell you they just worshipped a god of rebirth in the sun. In the Bible, that's looked at as being one and the same, but he had to sacrifice his own son to fix a problem that he had set up long ago. I have to go into that in different videos here because that will just make this longer. Wish this would resetting. So, followers of this ancient religion didn't necessarily have anything against Christianity based on its preference for a single god, or many cults within each sect had a primary deity at the center of religions, so beneath which a subordinate deities were also worshipped. Whenever you look at the Bible and you say that there's major angels and a lot of lesser angels, and then there's saints that do all these things from you, can you not see that this is a pantheon? Very much like the old ones, where they have their usages and their fits, just relegated to angels. In fact, wow, this thing just keeps reloading. In fact, if we looked at the depiction of ancient angels, this winged, godlike creature is in all of these old, ancient, pagan type of religions, is it not? And where it comes from and the connections that we still try to attach to it today, but in a different light. Also, quite similar. So, paganism, a title, was not intended only to reference the non-Christians and the non-Jews out of the group, isolating them into one solitary category that would be easily more destroyed and replaced. Think about that. Here we can see a lot of the depictions here of the ancient Roman gods and so on. It almost looks like a heavenly type depiction, and there's even in fact winged people that are in this depiction, but it really has nothing to do with it. It's the triumph of civilization. Many ancient religions were polytheistic and believed in a pantheon of gods, it says here, but a lot of those were just really aspects of so on, and they were all working in the effort for the one. We still believe in this idea today, but instead of having things cut into their separate parts, where you would pray to somebody who was so busy with everything that he may not have time for it, that we would pray to one that was dedicated toward that exact thing, and the guy here. Yeah, it got to be where everybody was praying for everything and of just a bunch of junk. Really, in part of it, it got to be a little too thick of a SERP, if you wouldn't say. Or you would. This effort of combining all non-Christian religions under one umbrella was, in fact, a clever strategy by the early Christians to remove the pagan faiths altogether, or to try to omit the fact that that's where it actually all came from and stemmed from. In fact, the knowledge of all these pagan religions and what they had to going on, whenever people could easily make correlations, was, oh, that's witchcraft too. If you knew the reality of it, then you were one of them. Using the Norse traditions as an example, the Vikings of early medieval period had no true name for their religious following. They didn't call it Christianity or this, that, and the other, and put a pin on it. In truth, the word religion would have been unknown, foreign term to them. I'll make note right now that this idea of religion is like a retelling, which is strangely telling in itself. Religion. So it's happening again. There was no all-encompassing word for the belief in the Aesir and the Vanir, though, and the various other beings and deities that the ancient Norse worshipped, and there was no written text discussing their practices until the Christian author Snorri Sturluson wrote their mythology down in the 13th century. Well, it was something that was kept and talked about. In fact, some of the guys that are deep into this tell you that they didn't write down the gods' words and things like that. This was something that was sacred and kept out. The only reason it was really done in the Bible is so they could quote it back to you. So here we look at an early Norse type depiction, and this is showing a triad of gods up here, God and a goddess, actually, and God's here, and a goddess, Freya, or sometimes looked at as Freyr. We've seen these stelae type things before, but a lot of these same related people made steles in a lot of different forms and factions. Because the artistic form is a little bit different, doesn't make their meaning very much different, does it? We have this going on, but then clearly there's a crown and a sun right behind them. I tell you that this is a detail of Runestone 181 in Stockholm. This is the Norse gods Odin, Thor, and Freya. They're represented as three men, though, in this, and Freya is actually Freyr instead of Freya, but I'd like to believe that you can't tell the difference between a male and female with the men growing their hair long and so on. You can see this man with a Phrygian type cap on, but then not necessarily on these two from behind. But there's that triad that's also familiar to us. According to Gareth Williams in Viking Life and Legend, what is now considered the North religion is actually the legacy of the Christian missionaries. Their textual product, concentrated target that is much easier to remove and erase than the amalgamation of gods literally worshipped. Consolidating the various Norse and every other pagan tradition into a simplified faith or one thing to attack with recorded rules and codes provided the early Christians with a more straightforward target to remove and replace. But it's a lot of it's still here, see, because you talk about Odin and Thor and Freya, but a lot of this is still kept. The days of the week begin by starting at the sun god, Sunday, and then moon for Monday, twos, an ancient Celtic god. Wednesday, which is Woden's or Odin's day. Thor is Thursday, Freya is Friday, and Saturday is for Saturn. Isn't that incredible? So according to Gareth Williams in Life and Legends, it's a little bit different, and they did this in a way to put everything all together and want people that they could attack in a way, and just saying it was all pagan, that everybody else's was agricultural, everyone else's was so on. Well, some of those agriculturists were known to only have really worshipped a god of the day, god of rebirth, and boy, that sounds familiar. Though the phrase paganism is widely used to describe followers of various ancient religions, it's important to understand from where the term originates and the misconceptions behind its usage. Too many centuries have passed now, and the word paganism will continue to label these supporters despite its original meaning. It'll basically mean any other religion other than your own. One wonders if you want to or not today, because there's still Hinduism, the beliefs of India and China. Do you want to call those pagan too? Well, you'd have to, really. Yeah. That ensues another problem, probably not worth talking about really right now. But it's never too late to be informed of the origins of the term, thereby allowing a better comprehension of the history of the ancient followers. Again, that picture started with Cronus, the horned god, the horned one. And that went through many cultures too. A couple of different creatures. In the time of Taurus, bulls were quite popular. You can see these depictions, and a lot of it still carries on. A lot of our festivals, such as Saturnalia, that is lost, and the Yule log and so on, has been taken and dwelled into our belief in Christmas. We have rites of spring still that go attached to this, that are really based on the rites of spring of the ancient pagans. And so things have really just changed a name. They just took down the signs and crap and repainted and put up a new one, called it something quite different, and everyone else was just a hick farmer and didn't really have it figured out, you see. Like, share, and subscribe. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Peace.